The history of the land of the Linnorm Kings. The history of the lands of the Linnorm Kings is long, stretching back over 5,000 years. In that time, control of the land has been held almost exclusively by the Ulfin people, although the amount of land these proud people have claimed is varied. Civilizations have risen and fallen in those millennia, but few have lasted long against the landscape of the savage north. Heroes come and go, their deeds recorded in songs, myths, and legends. Much of the history of these lands is lost to the written word, and often the last holder of immeasurable troves of knowledge has died without passing on her wisdom. Certainly, savage tribes of nomadic Ulfin roamed the Northlands as far back as the time of Thanelands, although it wasn't until well after the fall of that empire and the passing of the Age of Darkness that these tribal societies first began their initial attempts at forming more modern civilizations. Our history in this region really begins in -624. That is the date that Sabjorn Armfang defeated a Crag Linnorm in single combat at the mouth of the Rhymeflow River, and declared himself the first of the Linnorm Kings, starting the tradition that all future kings must slay a Linnorm to rule. He established Karlsgard, which started as a mead hall for him and his warriors, but grew as his fame did. In -609, Sabjorn's kingdom had grown to cover all lands north of the Rhymeflow, from the Broken Bay Islands to Glacier Lake and Irison in the east. He was known as a ruthless and unbeatable enemy. In -608, King Sabjorn Armfang turned his attention south into the giant lands of Old Cyrusian, and tried to conquer the giants dwelling in the Thessalonian ruins near the Rhymeflow. He went into Grungir Forest to defeat the legendary Linnorm Fafnir, and used that as leverage to rule over the giants, but he never returned, and by the end of the year his kingdom was divided into 24 fiefdoms. In -502, Skald Rolf Redhand sang a beautiful song for nymph queen Sadrinis, who granted him a choice of treasures, which she chose a harp woven of golden hair that granted him legendary powers over his followers' morale. Rolf led his fanatic army to conquer the southern lands once held by Thanelands and now held by the Empire's giants. Although he and his army were defeated by the stone and rune giants of Tarandey, word of their successes spread, and more Ulfin armies came to claim the giants' treasure. In -479, King Ulvas defeated the Fjord Linnorm Skallagrunder and conquered the city of Karlsgard, disrupting Sabjorn's legacy by killing his descendant and burning the Sabjorn Mead Hall. In -473, King Ulvas led a fleet of barbarians from Karlsgard west to discover Arcadia. He established the secret city of Valenhall. In -450, the Giantkin War began, as the giants of the southern lands and the Ironbound archipelago united under the rule of Queen Ledamaru and launched a devastating 4-year assault on the Linnorm kingdoms. Karlsgard endured a 3-month siege, but an aging King Ulvas led a heroic charge and drove the giants back. In -446, King Ulvas led his greatest soldiers south into Old Cyrusian, slaughtering giants until he confronted Queen Ledamaru in Tarandey. Unwilling to admit defeat, Ledamaru turned the magic that preserved Tarandey into a weapon and brought the city down, killing King Ulvas and his army. This only brought more attention to the giant-held lands of Old Cyrusian. In -440, the last giants were driven out of Old Cyrusian, and the Linnorm kingdoms expanded to engulf these realms. In -217, Ulfin longships reached a Taldan port, and half the crew stayed to sell their services as bodyguards. In -5, the mainland Linnorm kingdoms were united in peace under the watchful eye of High King Olaf Hagensborg. Only the relatively young island kingdoms of Broken Bay and the Ironbound archipelago remained unruly and independent. High King Olaf declared this to be a kingdom that would rival those of the soft southerners for 10,000 years. A year later, in -4, during a strange and localized earthquake, a keystone from the arch slipped out of place and crushed High King Olaf's skull. His lieutenants vowed to carry on with his vision, but without their charismatic king's leadership, tension and jealousy amid the bickering lieutenants, caused in part by long-held tribal animosities, threw the mainland Linnorm kingdoms into a bloody civil war. The island nations were largely untouched by this mayhem, and rumors persist to this day that the earthquake that killed King Olaf was engineered by Ulfin druids from the island of Battlewall. In the year 10, Jarl Strom Sunbuilt hired a company of mercenary wizards. They destroyed his rivals with flame, illusion, and demon-driven hordes. The Jarl claimed the throne of Karlsgard and established the wizards as his enforcers. They began a reign of darkness and blood. In the year 25, a popular revolt flared. Jarl Strom's mercenary wizards were burned alive in a sacrifice to the gods of winter. Ulfin warriors took their longships to stamp out the bloodlines of those wizards, sailing to the furthest reaches of the inner sea to seek their revenge. In 752, Ulfin explorers traversed the polar ice and settled into the taiga of northern Casmarin, founding Okormir. In 801, a major sea battle in Broken Bay stranded hundreds of Ulfin warriors on the Isle of Calva, just at the onset of a harsh winter. After resorting to cannibalism, these Ulfin fell under the influence of fell spirits, transforming Calva into a nightmare island that is avoided by sailors to this day. In 1033, an expedition from Kalsgard pushed as far as the Tusk Mountains, claiming these lands in the name of the Linnorm Kings. In 1102, the city of Yol was founded in the ruins of Torrendey by King Eskir Honeytongue. Those remaining Thessalonian structures still standing were torn down and scavenged as building materials for the new city. In 1218, Ulfin raiders began attacking the west coast of Garin with increased frequency. Remains of their ancient colonies and runestones marking their homes are still found along the shoreline. In 1300, Amatatsu Agenhei, a famed Tian explorer, established the trade route known as the Path of Agenhei between Tianxia and Avestan over the crown of the world. Scandalized by this new connection to the barbaric lands, Minkai's emperor ordered Agenhei executed upon his return and destroyed all of his maps that could be found. A few maps survived, but they, and the path itself, remained hidden for 3,000 years. In 1677, Bilt was founded on the island of Agos by King Eneric Stormbreaker, a notorious raider whose love of violence and mayhem persisted to the current day amid the city's eager citizens. In 1975, Ulfin longships raided heavily along the west coast of Avestan, and in the region now known as Cheliax. In 2000, the Taldan fleet sailed out to meet these Ulfin raiders, and after the Battle of Aradin's Arch, they limped home, barely victorious. In 2003, King Rolf Eriksson of Yol returned to Aradin's Arch at the head of a fleet and savaged the Taldan colonies there. He returned with hostages and demanded a weregild of 100,000 gold pieces. Taldor paid, and the Crown Prince signed a peace treaty with Eriksson. In 2261, skirmishes with the Kelids of the realms of the Mammoth Lords simmered, with the Linnorm kingdoms drawing their boundaries along the Tusk Mountains and the Kodar Mountains. In 2655, Halgrim was founded by King Igarven after he successfully defeated several bickering tribes of hill and taiga giants who had dwelled on the island since the Giantkin War so many years ago. In 2773, Torvald Halvard of Jarl led a 5-year campaign against the frost giants of the Kodar Mountains and personally slew 7 of their jarls before vanishing into a deep crevasse while fighting the 8th. His bones were never recovered. In 3312, during the summer of that year, the northern lights flared brightly enough over a period of 12 hours that they were mistaken for the sun. Later, historians agreed that the brilliant lights were an omen signaling the oncoming of the Winter War. This winter was so cold that swords shattered in the frigid air. In 3313, the following year, the nation of Irisen was born, when the witch queen Baba Yaga conquered the eastern reach of the lands of the Linnorm Kings, enslaving or butchering many of the Ulfin dwelling in the area. In 3314, Black Raven Hall was established to act as a bulwark against the witch queen's forces. The Black Ravens themselves played a key role in preventing further expansion by Irisen into the western kingdoms. In 3318, Trollheim was fortified, and the wise sought advice from the First World about ways to combat the threat of Irisen. In 4100, Kuthites from Nidal arrived in Yol, attempting to put the populace under the heel of the Shadow Lord. King Yori Hagreach put one of them to the Blood Eagle and burned the rest alive when he discovered that they were fascinated by the ritual and clamoring to be next. In 4300, maps of the Path of Agenhei were rediscovered in the hidden vaults of northern Minkai, and the route found more support this time around. Over the next several years, trade between Tianxia and Avestan increased dramatically, with those arriving in Kalsgard generally hailing from Minkai. The Tian population in Kalsgard grew swiftly, establishing the city's famous Jade Quarter. In 4402, a Chelish armada of 30 ships attempted to make landing at Halgrim. The Marines were met on the beach by swordsmen and shield maidens, and though the Chelish established a beachhead, they progressed no further inland. The third night, an Ulfin longship set ablaze the Chelish admiral's vessel. The Ulfin formed a shield wall and forced the Chelish into the sea. The few Chelish survivors were placed aboard their lone surviving vessels, with a barrel of pickled heads to serve as a message to the Chelish king. In 4606, Aradin died. Oracles, seers, and witches across the Linnorm kingdoms perished as the force of the god's death shattered their prophecies. In 4648, Arnalagar the Fearless disappeared in the Black Tarn, having worn his Linnorm scale armor and carrying the ancient blade Riksbrand. In 4694, Opier Eightfingers appeared at the gates of Yol with the decayed head of a Linnorm that many claimed he scavenged from a corpse. Over the next 10 years he fought over 20 duels to prove his right to the throne. In 4702, Sven Bloodeagle sent a cohort to reinforce Yol. Although he did not trust Eightfingers, he believed the land needed stability in whatever form it could find. In 4704, White Estrid sailed triumphantly into Absalom after breaking a Chelish blockade at the Arch of Aradin. Upon returning home, she defeated the Ice Linnorm Boiltongue and became a Linnorm King. Her use of strange weapons that she claimed were gifts from Earth spirits enraged other rulers of the lands of the Linnorm Kings, but now she is well established. In 4709, Ingemundr the Unruly sent a fleet of longships south to raid numerous coastal towns throughout the Inner Sea to prove he was stronger than White Estrid, but half the fleet sank in a freak storm, and the remaining ships were driven aground in Varissia. Finally, in 4719, the return of the Rune Lord's adventure path took place. As discussed in my video on Varissia, the Rune Lords Sorshan and Bellamarius, the Lords of Lust and Envy respectively, established a realm called New Thanelands in northern Varissia and covering some of the Linnorm kingdoms of Southmoor and the Ironbound Islands. Bellamarius, the more aggressive of New Thanelands' two ruling Rune Lords, quickly found herself in conflict with both the elves of the Grungir Forest and the Linnorm kingdoms. In fact, Bellamarius' first major act as ruler was to overthrow the Linnorm king Opier Eightfingers, conquering some of his kingdom of Southmoor and a great many of the Ironbound Islands that previously were part of the domain of the Linnorm queen White Estrid. Today, Bellamarius and White Estrid have a tentative ceasefire, with Estrid's domain including the large islands of Battlewall and Flinty Reach and the smaller islands of Three Hags Rock and Dragon's Rib, while Bellamarius' domain includes pretty much all the other islands. Meanwhile, in Southmoor, Ostog the Unslain, a legendary Ulfin adventurer and the subject of many impossible sagas, including the defeat of a risen pharaoh in ancient Osirian, emerged at the capital carrying the head of the great Linnorm Gullinjal, the serpent of Vilhall Mountain. Ostog claimed the now empty throne of Yol. He rules the kingdom of Southmoor today. Two other major events occurred in 4720. The first is that the Linnorm king Nanku rose to power in Icemark, the first Linnorm king to ever rule that desolate land. The second is that the ancient, powerful, and legendary First Lord among the Linnorm kings, King Sven Bloodeagle, left for Valenhall, the journey that many such kings had made before him in their waning years. Sven was succeeded by his own daughter, Thera Asheyes, who slew the great Crag Linnorm Zahasha to prove her worth as a ruler to her people. She selected a beast far more fearsome and terrible than might have been necessary given her significant lineage. She rules in the capital of Kalsgard today. Today, the Linnorm kingdoms comprise 7 different regions. Each of these, in theory, serves as one of the land's kingdoms, although currently only a few are actually ruled by active kings. In times past, the number of kingdoms has varied, as powerful rulers have conquered neighbors or as larger kingdoms have split as a result of unrest and civil war. Indeed, at the historical height of their power, the Linnorm kingdom stretched all the way from the steaming sea in the west to the Tusk Mountains in the east. But with the coming of Baba Yaga and the resulting winter war, the lands of the Linnorm kings saw their greatest defeat, as the witches of Irisin captured many of the eastern kingdoms to establish their own land of eternal winter. The Linnorm kings still seethe at this treachery, but even the treachery of Irisin has to date been unable to unite the kingdoms as one nation, a truth that has vexed and shamed several of the land's leaders over the past several hundred years. Legend holds that there will indeed, someday, be a Linnorm king powerful enough to unite the kingdoms under a single banner. But for such a king to rise to power, the old tales require such a ruler to first slay the greatest Linnorm in the land, Fafnir. Many have attempted to slay this legendary beast, beginning with the first of the land's Linnorm kings, King Sabjorn Armfang, yet even he failed to achieve this glory. As for the future of these lands, only time will tell. Let's take a look at the individual kingdoms, traveling west to east and north to south as we go. Broken Bay. Located on the westernmost fringe of the Linnorm kingdoms, Broken Bay comprises the water surrounding the island of Agos, Orthost, and dozens of smaller uninhabited rocks. Of these, only Agos is what could probably be called civilized. Broken Bay itself is home to plentiful schools of fish and the occasional pot of whales, and fishing is the primary industry for those brave enough to make a living here. The region is notorious for its storms, powerful tides, and currents. Life in Broken Bay is cold and rough, and those who grew up here are shaped by these environs, becoming mercenaries and raiders who seek to plunder coastal settlements throughout the Inner Sea. Ingemundr the Unruly rules Broken Bay from the city of Bilt, the only natural harbor in the region. He has grand plans to restore Bilt's prominence and strengthen his own influence by increased raiding and adopting a more martial lifestyle, and sees Broken Bay as the last bastion of bona fide sea raiders in the Linnorm Kingdoms. The people of Broken Bay harken back to a simpler time in Elfin history, when plundering the southern lands constituted a sort of regional pastime, and trading was restricted to well-defended ports. These folks see the other inhabitants of the Linnorm Kingdoms, particularly those of landlocked Hagreach, as varying degrees of cowards or traitors to their ancestors. While the raiders of Broken Bay still focus their assaults on Cheliax, Varisia, Nadal, and other southern nations, they are increasingly turning their attention to the other Linnorm Kingdoms as these views of regional cowardice grow. The shipyards of Bilt have been turning out more longboats and fewer fishing boats, and the hearths of the city overflow with tough young warriors eager to make a name for themselves. Raiding is more fun than fishing for a warrior, and there have to be targets to attack. Finding a way to make a consistent living off the unwary and undefended of western Avestan is the challenge of the age, a challenge Ingemunder must overcome if he wishes to keep his crown. Ingemunder himself is a hard man and a brash one, but beneath his boasting lies a shrewd, calculated, and manipulative mind, a fact exemplified by his handling of the raiding issue. Ingemunder has done more than anyone to increase Ulfin raiding, a feat he achieved by publicly espousing a more warlike and traditional lifestyle, without explicitly encouraging violence and theft. This approach has kept him from being properly held to account by other more conservative Linnorm kings. At the same time, he privately encourages raids and officially ignores the provenance of the goods and gold that enter his port. As a result of these policies, he's seen Bilt's fame rise as plunder surreptitiously flows into the port and into his coffers. Bilt. Bilt is the capital and by far largest settlement in Broken Bay. Nestled among 3 basalt crags, Bilt is Agos's only natural harbor. In the Linnorm Kingdoms, the city is second only to Kalsgard in the quality of its shipyards. Unlike southern port cities that focus on deep harbors and extensive dock infrastructure, Bilt features flat, gravelly strands on which longboats are beached when not in use. Ulfin longboats usually need less than a fathom of draft, so the only deep part of the harbor is reserved for foreign trading vessels, although the inhabitants of Bilt see fewer of such ships as their reputation for violence continues to grow. The town itself is dense and crowded along the shore, since almost everyone here makes a living from the sea. The nicest houses overlook the harbor, while cheaper houses squeeze in behind them on muddy, ill-maintained roads. When not at sea, the young Ulfin who crew the longboats and fishing vessels tend to live in large communal halls called hearths. The typical hearth houses 20 people, keeping the density of the city up and the walks to the harbor short. Non-Ulfin visitors to Bilt can expect an unfriendly welcome at best, especially from the young Ulfin who make up the raiding parties. Bilt's notorious bar fights and brawls can swiftly turn deadly when foreigners are involved. The weather in Bilt is also unfriendly to visitors. Bilt fronts on the steaming sea, and storms roll in frequently. The harbor is protected from the violent winds and squalls, but the higher reaches of the city are more exposed. A weathered, wind-blown look marks the long-time residents of Bilt, and anybody whose face isn't chapped by the salty winds is regarded as an outsider. Apart from Bilt, the only other significant settlement in the region is Skjoldamur. Near the southern tip of Agos lies the whaling town of Skjoldamur. Skjoldamur commands a small region of arable land that produces most of Agos's grain. The people of Skjoldamur are also tasked with keeping the lore and legends of Orthost, the funeral island to the south. Expedition to Orthost first stop at Skjoldamur, where clerics of Gorum hold ceremonies to prepare the dead for passage to the afterlife. These clerics accompany groups of mourners as they travel across to the island to bury their dead, both to aid in rituals and to protect mourners from the restless dead that dwell on the isle. Skjoldamur itself looks more like a fortress than a traditional town. It is built on a steep bluff and surrounded by ancient and thick stones. Its harbor is small, built primarily to service whaling and fishing boats and not for war. The town itself is ruled by Aric Grimfire, whose ancestors have held sway over the town for centuries. Grimfire and his acolytes are renowned across Ulfin lands for their skill in fighting and warding off the undead, and individual cairn guards that he's trained often find their way south and east, aiding the living throughout Avestan. Aric Grimfire secretly disapproves of Ingemunder's lust for war and raiding, since he sees the destruction of both Bilt and Skjoldamur as the inevitable result of such actions, but he knows his place, and focuses on providing the people of Broken Bay with food and honoring and protecting its dead. Icemark. No other kingdom in the Linnorm lands exemplifies the cold, desolate life in the north more so than Icemark. The northwesternmost territory of the Linnorm kingdoms is a hard, rugged land. This swath of tundra and glacial scree is relatively little to tempt a society built upon traditions of raiding and conquering. There is, after all, very little to raid and conquer here, apart from the vast herds of caribou, or fields of frozen soil. For a long time, Icemark had no ruler at all, but that changed a few years ago. The Linnorm king Nanku has become the incumbent ruler of the Linnorm kingdom of Icemark. An ethnic Varki, he is the first non-Ulfin to claim the mantle of Linnorm king. Born in the taiga of Icemark, Nanku's life started bitterly. His tribe was slaughtered by one of the fearsome draconic creatures known as the Linnorms on the day of his birth. His pregnant and wounded mother fled as her fellow tribe members died. She managed to survive giving birth in the desolate taiga, then carried her infant one desperate mile after another, until she collapsed near Seir's home, a settlement serving as home to the elders of all Varki tribes. Raised in Seir home, Nanku survived this auspicious beginning. Shortly before his 17th birthday, while hunting, Nanku encountered a newborn black bear, mewling and blind-eyed, as it cuddled against its mother's torn and half-eaten corpse. Nanku felt an instant affinity for the tiny creature whose birth seemed so akin to his own, and he adopted the bear cub, naming it Takamo. Together, Nanku and Takamo grew stronger and more powerful with each passing day. Over the decades of their adventures together, Nanku and Takamo became folk heroes for the Varki of Icemark. Born to a dead tribe and raised by the elders of all tribes, Nanku was welcome amongst all Varki tribes, and the earnest young man was happy to repay each tribe's hospitality. Hunting, slaying beasts and monsters, or relaying word of events affecting the region to Varki who lived far from trade routes, Nanku's reputation grew to precede him wherever he went. As several unusually harsh winters in a row drove the nomadic Varki tribes closer to their Ulfin neighbors, Nanku began to see increasingly dangerous interactions between the Varki and the Ulfin. The two peoples had coexisted for so long, in part due to their rarity of crossings, and as they found themselves in increasingly close contact, misunderstandings, like lopsided trade agreements, threatened to undermine the long-standing peace. It was then that Nanku truly understood exactly what it was he had been born for. Taking up his bow, and with Takamo at his side, Nanku returned to the frozen woodlands of his birth, seeking the creature that had slain his tribe so long ago. Nanku and Takamo fought a fearsome battle from which neither warrior escaped unscathed. Nanku gave an eye, and Takamo won as well, along with the foreclaw, but in the end they returned to Seir's home, bearing the head of the mighty Taiga Linnorm. Nanku declared himself the Linnorm King of Icemark. This act not only gave him leadership over the Ulfin people of the land, but functionally made Nanku the primary diplomat for his people with the Ulfin as well, whose awe at the Varki's proven claim to the title of Linnorm King smoothed relations between the peoples significantly. Despite his unique heritage and his relatively recent claim to the title of Linnorm King, Nanku has surprisingly good relations with some of the nearby monarchs. White Estrid has sent multiple diplomats to Icemark since Nanku claimed the throne, though the emissaries have found themselves indulging in Icemark's hospitality for months while waiting for Nanku to return from the tundra. Nanku also considers himself friends with Thera Asheyes, the successor to and daughter of long-standing Linnorm king Sven Bloodeagle. When Sven sailed off to Valenhall, young Thera hewed to the traditions of her people and set out to slay a Linnorm. As she trekked out into the wilderness between Icemark and the Thanelands, she encountered Nanku in her wanderings. Already a Linnorm king at this point, Nanku recognized the young warrior's aspirations and shared a fire and a meal with her. In time, Thera claimed her own Linnorm and the throne that went with it, and of course she still thinks of the Varki Ranger fondly. Nanku hopes this meeting will help strengthen the relations between the Ulfin of the Thanelands and the Varki of Icemark. Not all of Nanku's neighbors are so pleasant. King Ingemundr the Unruly of nearby Broken Bay is notably old-fashioned and even more notably quarrelsome. Ingemundr's open encouragement of raiding remains one of Nanku's pressing threats. Though the Ulfin king claims to distance from those ships who plunder other Linnorm kingdoms, it is well known that he also turns a blind eye to them, and Nanku's proximity no doubt marks him as an attractive target. Seir's home. Seir's home is not only the largest of the Varki shelters, it's also the only one with a permanent population, and effectively the capital of Icemark. When a shaman or other religious figure grows too old to safely travel with the rest of her tribe, the tribe brings its beloved leader here to join the ranks of the Varki seers, leaders who come together in this large cave to preserve the Varki way of life in a tribe composed entirely of the elderly. Without the dangers and discomforts of travel, these seers are free to philosophize, create beautiful works of art, or otherwise honor Varki traditions. At any one time, 100 or so seers can be found here, supported by one of the other Varki tribes. This tribe stays for a month or so before a new tribe arrives to replace it, allowing the previous tribe the freedom to return to the nomadic lifestyle. Seir's home itself is built into a great cavern complex, complete with hot springs. Rare plants and fungi grow in the caverns and supplement the seers' diets. The seers claim that these plants grant them extra powers of communication with the ancestors, the animal spirits, and the gods. The lower caverns of Seer's home are filled with intricate patterns of writings on the wall and stone arrangements on the floors, all part of some notation system known only to the seers of the shelter. Dozens of caverns filled with shelters and accessed by leather and bone ladders make up Seer's home, but 2 particular chambers deserve special mention. Near the top lies the Cavern of 10,000 Souls, a vast chamber whose walls glitter with multicolored crystals said to be the source of all Varki souls. A shaft in the center of this cave drops nearly 300 feet down to the steaming pool of geothermally heated life water caverns, a cavern used as a religious retreat by Varki seers throughout Icemark. Other important places in the region include the Cavern of the Sacred Shapes. The Cavern of the Sacred Shapes was once the centerpiece of Varki sculpture and artwork, but several generations ago the cavern was seized by a race of wolf-like humanoids known as the Adlets that swept through the Stormspear Mountains to wage war upon the Varki. The reasons these savage monsters assaulted the Cavern of Sacred Shapes remains unclear to the Varki, but survivors have reported that the Adlet seemed strangely reverent of the old Varki cave paintings and murals that decorate the caverns, giving rise to rumors in recent years that the Adlets are in fact a cursed branch of ancient Varki and have come south from a forgotten exile to reclaim their birthright. Elf meat. The crown of the world is not the empty, uncivilized land that many southerners believe it to be. Many indigenous tribes of humanoids dwell in the vast northern continent. Chief among these people are the Ilvarani, or snow elves, a culture of elves who have lived in the crown for as long as even they can remember. The Ilvarani keep no settlements this far south, yet they often trade with the Varki nonetheless. The snow elves are particularly fond of Varki scrimshaw and often trade potent magical supplies and items for well-crafted Varki art. When the Ilvarani do visit Icemark, they generally travel along a coastal route to avoid the dangers of the inner storm spears. They traditionally set up camp at a double ring of standing stones overlooking the sea. This location is known as Elfmeet, and whenever a tribe comes close, they make a point to visit and engage in trade with any of the snow elves who might be present. Kalva. This sizable island just south of Icemark is inhabited by a sinister tribe of degenerate descendants of shipwrecked Ulfin who have adopted a most unseemly tradition of cannibalism. The people of Kalva are brutal warriors and berserkers, showing no mercy, with each village fending strictly for itself. They are giants even among the Ulfin, often reaching 7 feet in height, though they are gaunt, wiry, and feral rather than muscular, for life on Kalva is hard. Their hair is lank blonde, and they wear greasy, poorly cured skins. Their eyes go milky white before they reach the age of 20, and they rely as much on scent and sound as they do on vision to track prey. As the Kalva men grow older, their skin grows taut and dirty yellow, while their eyes grow wispy with fungal growth, and their hair falls out and their fingernails grow long. These are the elders of Kalvan society, and they rarely, if ever, emerge from their cavern lairs. They are led by a powerful sorcerer, a woman who fills the role of Old Crone, and serves as the people's spiritual guide. The Moundlands. On the northern bank of the confluence of the White Gold and Vjaldahun rivers lies a region of softly rounded hills set in irregular patterns, surrounded by scores of lower-lying hills. In the early days of the Linnorm kingdoms, it was to these burial mounds that the people traveled when their kings died. The larger mounds each contain the burial complex of one of the ancient kings, while the smaller ones contains the tombs of lesser nobles and favored champions. It is said when the 99th king was buried here, a strange and terrible thing occurred. The dead awoke. Today this dread land is avoided by any right-thinking Ulfin. The dead kings here continue their politicking and bickering in their afterlife, and as alliances are born and broken, they often call upon the soldiers of the outlying mounds to build underground tunnels or collapse others. As a result, a tangled mess of underground passageways connects many of the mounds in confusing routes. These tunnels are often abandoned and become the lairs of undead with no allegiance to any king. It is a deadly place, but there is treasure to be found here, for the brave or foolish. Windhome. The Varki are primarily a coastal society and depend heavily upon the bounty of the sea, and as such they keep no significant villages within the vast expanse of empty land they call the Windhome. The Varki believe that this extensive tundra is the source of all ill winds, and to an extent they might be right, for the deeper one travels into this barren land, the more it seems a frozen desert of rock and lichen. The land offers little in the way of shelter from topography or forests, so the winds that tear through this inhospitable region can be frightening indeed, all the more so when one realizes that the winds more often than not are supernatural in nature, for the deepest, most remote regions of Windhome are the domain of the Wendigos. The Varki know of these dangerous monsters, yet they never speak aloud of the creatures for fear that they might be heard. The Thanelands. The largest of the Linnorm kingdoms is the Thanelands, a realm that until recently had been ruled by the steady hand of Sven Bloodeagle. Sven was the eldest and most powerful of the Linnorm Kings, and his subjects regarded him as a stern but kind fatherly figure. He had labored hard during his reign to expand and maintain his realm's influence, greatly increasing trade with many lands to the south, as well as capitalizing on the trade route to the north over the crown of the world that linked his kingdom to Tianxia. Sven had also taken under his wing certain locations that markedly contributed to the prosperity of the Thanelands, including the dwarven copper mines at Copperberget. In recent years, Sven sailed west to Valenhall, and his daughter, Thera Asheyes, has taken over as Queen of the Thanelands. She is well liked by her people, but her reign is a new one, and she is still very young and has much to prove to live up to her father's storied legacy. Thera is the youngest of 4 siblings, including her sister Ingvalda the Bold and her brothers Björgen Whale-Eater and Uldren Orksbane, the last of which, the eldest of his siblings, had always been the first to discredit her. Despite being the youngest, it was Thera that slew the great dragon Zahasha and claimed the throne by blood right, and the other siblings have all acquiesced to her rule, although it is unspoken common knowledge that Uldren greatly covets her throne. Thera herself also has unfinished business in the east. For years, Thera's father, Sven Bloodeagle, plotted to strike out against the nation of Irisin and reclaim the lands Baba Yaga had taken from the Linnorm Kings. Knowing his years were growing short, Sven had recently been increasing his preparations, spurred on by news of the fall of the Winter Queen and the change in rulership. Yet Sven abandoned his plans and sailed across the sea to the lands of Valenhall, leaving his grand mission unfulfilled. All know that for Thera to complete her father's great ambition, it will require coordinated military planning, expert politicking with the other Linnorm kings, and incredible audacity, which Thera has already shown she possesses in spades. The capital of the Thanelands, and indeed all of the Linnorm kingdoms to a certain extent, is Karlsgard. Karlsgard, the oldest surviving settlement of the Linnorm kingdoms, is a huge bustling city, rising upon the southern shore of the Rhymeflow River's wide mouth. Founded countless centuries ago, it has grown from a crude village into today's thriving metropolis. No records survive from the time of Karlsgard's founding, but an ancient saga tells that King Ulvas set sail from Karlsgard on his epic journey to discover Arcadia almost 500 years before Aradin raised the Starstone from the depths of the Inner Sea. Therefore, the township of Karlsgard must have existed in some form for at least 5,000 years. Historically, much of Karlsgard's growth came from its role as a major trading port for Ulfin Vikings returning from raids to the south. The spoils brought back by these reavers ensured the city's expansion and allowed specialist crafts to develop that cater to the influx of sailors and local desires for exotic goods. In the more recent past, the rugged sailors of the Linnorm kingdoms have increasingly turned to trade, making Karlsgard the primary mercantile port in the north. Much of the surrounding areas consists of carefully tended farmlands that generate foodstuffs and raw materials that are exchanged for high-quality merchandise and trade goods. Karlsgard has been ruled by a continuous line of Linnorm kings dating back before the Winter War with Irisin. While the city has suffered fires, sieges, and other disasters, its citizens have always survived and rebuilt the city stronger than before. The Ulfin residents are a mixture of tribes from different parts of the northern lands, with subtly differing cultures and traditions. Other substantial human ethnicities in the city include the Varki, who come from the Arctic lands of Icemark in the northwest, Varisians, who hail from the south, and Tien, who reside in the Jade Quarter along the city's waterfront. Karlsgard has a large dwarf population as well. Deeply integrated into the life of the city, dwarves are well regarded and their expertise in many trades deeply appreciated. The lifestyle of Karlsgard suits dwarves. They mix freely with other races and are welcomed as valued members of society. While many dwarves hold respected positions throughout the city, a large number dwell in the enclave of Undercroft, a series of tunnels and canals built directly into the banks of the Rhymeflow River and passing beneath the city itself. Here, among the foundations of Karlsgard, dwarves carve ice and stone to amass reservoirs of fresh water, and tend enclosures of underground livestock bountiful enough to provide the city's population during winter. The gnomes of Karlsgard live primarily on the northern bank of the Rhymeflow River, in the township of Iceferry, operating many of the ferry services that provide passage across the river. While some of the other citizens grumble at the gnomes' eccentricities, many in Karlsgard feel they brighten the city and enjoy their unique perspectives. The potent gnome whiskey called Throatburn is infamous throughout the city for its intoxicating power. On the fire day of Desnas, the gnomes of Karlsgard hold mock Linnorm hunt festivals in the city's main promenade. The hunt excites the imagination of Karlsgard children as they search for and slay the Beast, an elaborate Linnorm costume operated by gnomes and supplemented with illusion magic. The natives of Karlsgard are used to seeing a wide variety of races and ethnicities in their streets. Visitors to Karlsgard find the native Ulfins coarsely boisterous and loud, but generally welcoming to those who treat the city and its people with respect and courtesy. While an exotically garbed stranger might draw stares from local passers-by, there are almost always looks of curiosity rather than fear or hatred. The only exceptions are for those who openly present themselves as witches from Irisen. The Linnorm Kingdoms have never formally declared a truce with Irisen, and anyone foolish enough to claim to be an Irisen national is swiftly arrested and then imprisoned, exiled, or executed. Kalsgard continues to expand and grow. Each year, many hopefuls come to the city from small towns and villages in search of employment, riches, and better life. Today, Kalsgard is a very large city, even by the standards of Taldor or Cheliax, although natives of those nations are often loath to acknowledge the Ulfin as peers. More than half the population of the Linnorm Kingdoms crams itself inside Kalsgard's thick walls, enjoying the security and prosperity of the nation's de facto capital. The walls, both around and within Kalsgard, clearly divide the city, forming the boundaries of many of the city's quarters. Remnants of older walls exist as well, but these were largely torn down long ago and their stones used as materials for housing. Today, the city's soldiers and guards use the parapets of the remaining partition walls as a way to move swiftly across the city, and severe penalties are enforced by those found tampering with or pilfering stones from these ramparts. The walls converge at the great ring castle of the Thanelands, the great keep of Queen Thera Asheyes, and the center of the city government. Other important places in the region include Aslafar. Aslafar is a sprawling coastal village, whose foremost industry is whaling. Longships ply the waters of the Arcadian Ocean, hunting pods of whales. They harpoon the great marine animals and return to Aslafar with the flensed and dismembered carcasses. Right whales and bowhead whales are the most popular, but larger whaling ships prefer to hunt sperm whales for the precious substance only this breed holds. The docklands of Aslafar are a tough and ready neighborhood. Dank flop houses, sweaty brothels, and squalid waterside taverns cater to the tough whale hunters, while nearby harbor facilities and dry docks swiftly repair and refit whaling vessels. The rancid smell of Aslafar's processing houses wafts over the town. The workshops boil down blubber into oil, clean and dry whale bones, and extract valuable cetacean substances, such as baleen and ambergris. Here, whale meat is plentiful and popular with the locals. The Path of Agenhay. First mapped in 1300 by the Tian explorer Amaterasu Agenhay, this trade route between Avestan and Tianxia has only recently grown into an important connection between the two continents. The path begins at Kalsgard, leading north from the city and cutting right through the central tundra of the Thanelands. Along this route, civilization retains its hold on the wilds, with many small villages dotting the way. Landlocked and far from major rivers, these villages depend entirely upon trade to survive. The path eventually reaches the fortified town of Turvik. Then it leads directly north through the Stormspear Hills and across 1,000 miles of unsettled wilderness before reaching the crown of the world. From here onward, the remaining several thousand miles increasingly require the assistance of experienced Agenhay guides. Most of these guides are kept as retainers by one of many mercantile guilds, and as such, finding a guide free to hire can be a difficult task, particularly in the off-season during the long winters. Turvik. This fortified town is the northernmost outpost of the civilization in the Thanelands. It's the final respite for those hoping to travel north over the frozen Arctic wastes of the crown of the world to the continent of Tianxia. The desolate place is a fortress, built and reinforced by generations of Linnorm Kings. Set atop a small rise, its upper towers overlook the flat, lifeless tundra that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The garrison is made up of the dishonored sent here as punishment, and those seeking to forget and escape their past. In the dark of winter, when the cold, howling wind whistles endlessly through the battlements, many in Turvik turn heavily to drink. A considerable portion of the supplies sent to Turvik are alcoholic in nature. A few Tian have remained in Turvik after their journeys, the most noticeable being the Marasawa family, who work as translators, teaching the languages of both Tianxia and Avestan to travelers. Ullerskad. Set in the heart of the Thanelands on the Rhymeflow, Ullerskad is a hub trade for the kingdom. Lumber, grain, livestock, and many other goods pass through the town on their way downstream, and some of the richest Ulfin merchants live here. Huskarls of the Ulfin Guard, who protect the Emperor of Taldor, often retire to Ullerskad. Numerous hunting lodges are found in the forests nearby, and hunting wild boar and other animals is a popular sporting pastime. The town is also the site of a large gold-adorned temple of Gorum. A small grove of trees stands beside the temple, each tree hung with the cadavers of sacrifice. The bodies of hounds and horses hang alongside the corpses of enemies who fell to the warriors of Ullerskad in combat. At the center of the grove grows a massive yew tree, whose far-spread branches remain green both in summer and winter. Beside the tree lies the source of a sacred stream, where priests hold a great sacrificial ceremony during the spring equinox. Zar Cragnal. For ages, the legendary fortress of Zar Cragnal has been whispered by the giants of the Linnorm Kingdoms to be a mythic throne of power, a portal to the afterlife, and most often the home of the so-called Deathless Jarl, a frost giant said to be so violent that Pharasma herself granted her eternal life out of fear for what the Jarl might do to the boneyard. The truth is not so outlandish, but neither is it far from reality, for the ruler of the basalt fortress of Zar Cragnal is indeed an ancient creature. Only she, and perhaps her closest allies, know her true name. The denizens of the fortress know the imposing frost giantess only as the Deathless Jarl, a creature of striking, almost unnerving beauty who commands the obedience of countless giants throughout the eastern storm spears. Very little among the giants spread throughout the region occurs without her involvement in some way or another, although she is fond of using secrecy, magical manipulation, and dream sendings to influence the numerous leaders among her kind, so that most believe that their inspirations come from themselves or their gods. Zar Cragnal itself is an imposing structure, large even for the frost giants and other oversized creatures that call it home. With windows of super-hard ice, towers of dead black rock, and delicate bridges of icicle-thick ice arching between the upper reaches, the entire structure towers nearly 700 feet in height. The fortress looms atop a low plateau deep in the mountains, and the view from its highest towers reaches above the lower peaks to the south to afford a panorama of the northern Thanelands at Hagreach. Frost giants are common in Zar Cragnal's halls, as are their favorite pets and minions, frost drakes, winter wolves, and yetis. The peaks of the fortress are the roosts of ice Linnorms, white dragons, and shantak birds, all of whom are close allies of the Deathless Jarl. Hagreach. Hagreach encompasses the current eastern edge of the lands of the Linnorm Kingdoms, yet this was not always the Linnorm Kingdom's eastern border. When Baba Yaga and her winter witches carved out the territory of Irisen in 3313, they subjugated and overwhelmed all of the eastern Linnorm Kingdoms. Conquest after conquest saw Irisen grow and the Linnorm Kings recede. It wasn't until a year later that the Ulfin managed to set aside their bickering to unite along the Iceflow and Thundering River to halt the witches' advance. With the fortification of Trollheim and additional aid from the Fae of the Grungir Forest in 3318, the tide finally turned and the Linnorm Kingdoms actually began to retake land south of the Iceflow. Today, border skirmishes with trolls, winter wolves, and winter witches remain common, and the towns of Hagreach are more like armed camps than typical villages. Trollheim is heavily walled and exhibits an intentionally confusing street layout, while the smaller villages of the region are surrounded by strong walls and a dense swath of vegetation. The people of Hagreach are more battle-ready as well, and are always wary of strangers and quick to violence. The region has had its share of Linnorm Kings in the past, but they have traditionally fallen quickly in the face of the ongoing struggle with Irisen. Few Linnorm Kings of Hagreach can long resist the temptation to seek the glory of being the one to retake one of the lost kingdoms to the east, even though those who lead the ill-advised assaults are swiftly defeated. The current ruler of Hagreach, Freyr Darkwine, Castellan of Trollheim, has yet to defeat a Linnorm, and has not claimed any plans to attempt such a feat anytime soon. Freyr is more interested in helping to keep Hagreach a strong bulwark against its enemies to the east than he is in personal glory. While his civil authority doesn't extend beyond the bounds of Trollheim, his moral authority and the respect he has gained from his single-minded fight against Irisen have spread across the whole region. The towns of Hagreach tend towards hunting and subsistence agriculture, and oversee some small iron and silver mines as well. Garnets abound on hillsides and on the streams that lace the plains, and trade in these and other gems provide most of the region's foreign exchange. In return for such commodities, the region imports weapons and extra food, as the effort expended patrolling the border sometimes makes agricultural yield unreliable. And the border does need patrolling. While Baba Yaga's daughters have been mostly content with these boundaries, they routinely encourage ice trolls, winter wolves, and mercenary bands to raid across the border to steal Ulfin children, wreak havoc, and loot treasure. Residents of Hagreach have lived with constant threat of violence their entire lives, and are always ready with spear, sword, or bow to defend themselves. Villages are well organized, with military tasks for men and women alike. Even children and elderly are routinely armed and expected to help against raids. The Black Ravens are an elite band of protectors, who have sworn their lives to fighting against Irisen. Most Black Ravens hail from Hagreach, but many come from the other Linnorm kingdoms as well, compelled by a sense of racial or national pride, and eager to defend their traditions on a war front. Most Black Ravens are barbarians, fighters, or rangers, while clerics of Gorm or Desna provide divine support. Several bards and sorcerers have made their home in the Black Ravens as well, their arcane magic lending extra firepower against their monstrous foes. Most Black Ravens are of Ulfin descent, but an increasing number of dwarves and even a few gnomes have joined their ranks as well. Freyr Darkwine, Castellan of Trollheim, is also commander of the Black Ravens. He divides his time between Blackraven Hall and Trollheim, managing both jobs competently. His heart, however, remains on the border, and he spends almost every waking morning preparing and strategizing, holding back the Winter Witches and their minions as much as possible. Freyr sees the Black Ravens as an asset of the Ulfin people as a whole, and routinely requests aid in warriors and in treasure from the other Linnorm Kings. He never receives much, but all of the Linnorm Kings give, if only grudgingly. Most donate only gold, and this only sparingly, but White Estrid has taken to granting Freyr soldiers as well, sending 40 warriors per year to join the Black Raven's ranks. These draftees from Battlewall spend a year learning to fight the forces of winter and aiding in the protection of the Ulfin lands, and then return home, wiser and more skilled in warfare. Freyr hopes that White Estrid's example will encourage other Linnorm Kings to do likewise. While gold is always appreciated, the Black Ravens need as many soldiers as they can get. Important places in the region include Black Raven Hall. The hall stands on the border with Irisen, overlooking the Rhymeflow River and controlling legitimate traffic to and from the enemy nation. Much like Castle Corvosa to the south in Varissia, the hall itself is built on the foundations of an ancient Thessalonian pyramid, which is filled with numerous chambers and strange magical defenses and resources. These defenses, which include a number of golems and bound outsiders, have proven time and again to be invaluable against certain magics from the Winter Witches that would cut down the typical human soldier with ease. Freyr Darkwine has spent the last decade improving the fortress's defenses, excavating a series of moats and spike-filled ditches, and laying down other obstacles to keep enemies in range of the Black Raven's arrows longer before they get to the wall. The recent addition of several allied river drakes as moat monsters has provided the hall an even greater defense than before. Eldentre. One of the largest settlements of Hagreach, Eldentre has a unique fortification system built around a single immense tree that has grown in the town square for centuries. This ancient oak acts as a lightning rod, attracting almost all of the storm's lightning, no matter how big the system. Known locally as the lightning oak, the tree glows and shimmers with dancing fairy fire for hours after a storm. More importantly, the elders of Eldentre have developed methods of storing these electrical charges in wood, carefully harvested from the lightning oak's branches, giving the town a steady supply of not only shock arrows, but also electrically charged siege weapon ammunition, defenses that have aided them often against Irisen attacks. Hellerin. The town of Hellerin is built near a cave that contains an ancient shrine to Pharasma. Many of the villagers are Pharasman devotees, and the village carries an introspective and solemn air. The nature of Hagreach doesn't allow for much variation of tradition, and protecting itself is still the first order of business. The Pharasman shrine itself consists of little more than a warm spring in the rocky floor of a cave, and it is said that any child delivered in the waters of the spring will grow up with Pharasma's blessing. It is true that many of the villagers of Hellerin have strange gifts, many of which lead the villagers to embrace lives as oracles. Expectant mothers often make a pilgrimage to Hellerin every year, risking travel and the frequent attacks while en route to birth their children in the shrine's warm waters. Stormspear Keep. The northmost line of defense along the border is Stormspear Keep, a grim collection of towers that perch upon a wide precipice rising nearly 2,000 feet above the surrounding lowlands. The keep is run by a skeleton crew of black ravens, allied with several nests of giant eagles, creatures whose mobility and keen eyes are quite handy in patrolling the northern border with Irisen. Trollheim. Trollheim is Hagreach's largest city. Perched on the southern bank of the Rhymeflow, where its tributary, the Iceflow, winds north, this is a heavily fortified settlement. The town has grown beyond its walls several times during its history, and the haphazard growth, and intentionally confusing layout meant to baffle attackers, has given rise to a hodgepodge of districts, some walled individually, others inside the city walls, and still others outside. Each district has its own distinct character, and they often don't flow into each other as seamlessly as in other cities. Most of Trollheim's trade flows up and down the Iceflow, the fastest and easiest connection with Karlsgard. The city's merchants often engage in hesitant trade with Irisen, although such ventures are highly regulated and scrutinized for sabotage and other treachery. Trollheim has many stockyards, tanneries, and textile mills, and the scrublands near the city is heavily grazed by sheep. Unlike the citizens of most large cities, Trollheim's residents are heavily involved in its defense. Every able-bodied citizen is expected to be trained with sword, spear, and bow, and public squares and alleyways are often given over to weapon practice. Few object to the imposition. Nobody wants to live this close to Irisen and be unarmed. Grungir Forest. Grungir Forest is the primordial heart of the Linnorm Kingdom's wilderness. While Fae, wild animals, monsters, and Linnorms reside everywhere humans do not, in Grungir they rule. The forest is home to Fafnir, said to be the oldest and most powerful of the Linnorms, as well as to numerous enclaves of strange and powerful Fae creatures. Portals to the legendary First World flicker within the woodland's tangled depths, and in places the very trees themselves move and speak in thunderous tones. No Linnorm King claims this land, and unlike Hagreach, there is no Castellan or High Lord either. The only civilized people who make their homes within Grungir Forest itself are the gnomes, and even they avoid delving too deeply into the forest depths. Grungir Forest spreads across the central Southlands in a nearly unbroken mass, with only the thundering river and a few roads providing a break in the eastern reaches. While humans engage in logging and trapping around the forest's eastern outskirts, particularly in the vicinity of Lostholm, they are careful not to harvest too deeply in the woods, even for rare or valuable hardwoods. It's generally not considered worth the risk to travel far enough in that you can't see the forest's edge. The same reluctance to explore does not apply to the numerous adventurers from across the inner sea who have been drawn to Grungir Forest, eager to plumb its depths in the hunt for unique creatures or secret places of power. Yet despite the number of explorers, Grungir Forest has always proved more than their equal, and to date it has kept the majority of its secrets quite well. Important places in the region include Delman's Glen. Whereas stranger gnome settlements are hidden in the deeper reaches of the wood, Delman's Glen is unusually mundane, perhaps because its location among the major overland trade route that connects Yol and Varissia to the south with the northern kingdoms. Despite its location on this route, the relatively small town has not grown significantly over the years. Most of its buildings resemble typical Ulfin architecture, yet as they are built by gnomes and for gnomes, they are curiously small. A few larger buildings, including a trading post and a much-frequented inn, the Raven's Best, sit on the edge of town, and most visitors can be found here. Delman's Glen has had trouble in the past with monsters from the southeastern Badlands, particularly bullets, but its current mayor, Bavakanka Winterlisp, is particularly gifted at recruiting visiting adventurers to deal with these situations as they arise. The Lair of Fafnir. Said to be the mightiest and oldest of them all, dread Fafnir makes his lair deep in the forest. Long before the first barbaric humans rose to power in this land, the Linnorm Fafnir emerged from a rent in the First World and established his home in the Grungir Forest. Some call Fafnir the father of all Linnorms, and while this is most likely an exaggeration, the truth is that the ancient beast has sired a host of the creatures that have spread across the length of the frozen north. Near Fafnir's lair, Linnorms are uncommonly fecund, and the forest itself bears the stigma of their presence in the shape of twisted trees, carnivorous plants, and nightmarish vistas of writhing vegetation not wholly of this world. Even the waters that flow through the streams and fill forest pools in the region are hazardous, for they are tainted with the poison and evil of the Linnorms and their father. Lostholm. The town of Lostholm serves double duty as a logging town and a watchpost along the border with Irisson to the east. The town is populated by the descendants of Ulfin refugees of the Winter War, most of whom have ancestors whose skulls now pave the streets of Whitethrone. Patrols from Lostholm keep an eye out for incursions by Irisson, and also for the occasional refugee fortunate enough to make it across the border. As a logging town, Lostholm provides an increasing amount of the Linnorm Kingdom's share of timber, as Yol grows increasingly ill-managed. Lostholm is a thriving woodworking industry, producing fanciful cabinetry and furniture that compete with the most elaborate but uncanny Irisson wares. Lumber is either milled or collected into booms that are sent downriver to Kalsgard. This cheap transport helps give Lostholm an advantage over settlements on the western edge of the woods. Getting goods from the outside is a more expensive prospect, as the roads leading north and south from the town are long and of bad quality. Of course, not all is well in Lostholm, for as the demand for its lumber grows, conflicts with the denizens of the deeper Grungir Forest grow as well. Currently, the town has managed to balance its need for lumber against its diplomatic relations with the Fae, but many foresee a time in the future when greed will eclipse diplomacy. Nithvale. The fabric of reality between the First World and Golarion wears thin in many parts of the world, but in the lands of the Linnorm Kings, that boundary is particularly stretched and torn. It flutters and strains most in Grungir Forest, where the Norns loom large, and the Linnorms coil and thrash, and all manner of strange fey creatures haunt the undergrowth and canopy. The fairy city of Nithvale is the most legendary of the cities, where the veil between the First World and the material plane has frayed or disappeared entirely. It appears on no map, for its location changes with the tides of magical energy that roil between the planes. This strange and twisted city appears in a new location deep within the Grungir Forest each time it manifests on the material plane, but spends the majority of its time firmly rooted in the First World. Nithvale's appearance on the material plane is linked to the new moon. On the first such night each month the city manifests, for as long as the darkness lasts, to astound and bewilder travelers who come across its delight and horrors. Come the morning, it vanishes like dew, only to reappear somewhere else in a month's time. Arching skyways and delicate spires crowd the city, squeezed in against grim and squat troll castles that breathe fetid air from broken gates. The city's passageways are little more than crooked alleys that open onto stunning fairy castles, fields of moonlight-soaked barrows, or graveyards through which mist crawls. The inhabitants of Nithvale are a strange lot, courts of strange fae and bizarre gnomes, and trolls of all stripes. Humans and other dwellers of Golarion live here as well. Some are sages, scholars, and wizards and visiting dignitaries, while others are thralls and slaves snatched from their homes. Those who make their homes here appear to be able to navigate the city with ease, following a dream logic that eludes visitors, who are invariably lost without guides. The rulers of the city are three. The first is a talking fey-wolf moonchaser, who lays the trails and directs the movements of the city. The mountain troll Gromiskalt is said to determine the allocation of knowledge and wonders to visitors. He deigns to speak with wizards and sorcerers if they can demonstrate sufficient agility of thought, and is believed to be the original creator of the Huldar. The third ruler, the Wight of Lord Thunkanas, is said to hold the unsleeping secrets of Nithvale's history. The way in which visitors enter the city, both physically and mentally, drives them ever deeper under the influence of one of the three rulers. Sojourner's Rest. Lying around and among the foundations of Thornwall Castle is the strange town of Sojourner's Rest. Visitors to this town must enter via tangled game trails, passing through magical veils that both protect the town and support its unusual architecture. Its pair of interlaced streets form a continuous Varisian knot, with no entrances or exits save into the castle itself. Every manner of fae makes Sojourner's Rest their home, from Usalkas and Nixies to Kharids and Satyrs, but pixies predominate. The town is full of various fae habitats, including gardens of giant flowers, numerous caves, fields, orchards, and waterfalls, all beneath Thornwall Castle, but somehow open to the sun and elements as needed. Many inns and restaurants and shops dot the sides of the street, and the broadest range of magical items and adventuring gear west of Whitethrone and north of Magnamar. Crass and unwelcome adventurers, however, who choose to eat the food or drink the spirits of Sojourner's Rest, often fall into a deep slumber and are never heard from again. The Ironbound Islands. The Ironbound Archipelago consists of 13 major islands and dozens of smaller ones, and stretches all the way south to the infamous Morden Spire. Over the 100 years, the Linnorm Kingdoms have ruled a variable number of these islands, but they've never ruled them all. Currently, the southern islands have been conquered by the forces of the Rune Lord Bellamarius, and are part of the Kingdom of New Edasseril, capitaled at Bellamarius' ancestral home of Zin Edasseril. The islands still controlled by the Linnorm Kingdoms are watched over by the Linnorm Queen White Estrid. A powerful woman with white hair and pale blue eyes from her albinism, Estrid wears ornately decorated armor that covers her body thoroughly to protect her from sunlight. Even her royal trappings are fashioned from thick leather, as she is perpetually ready to do battle. Her battle axe is always at her side, the hilt hewn from the dark rock of the Ironbound Islands. As a young girl, Estrid joined a hearth with the intention of training as a warrior. During her time at the hearth, Estrid refined her skills with the sword as well as in sailing. After leading the fleet of longboats, she sailed on a great raid on the port of Nizrock in 4704. Estrid broke the blockade at the Arch of Aradin, and ferried the raided treasure directly into the harbour at Absalom, the city at the centre of the world. Due to this and other exploits, Estrid gained a reputation as daring in the face of danger. When tales of a crag Linnorm taking up residence on one of the islands struck the ears of her crew, Estrid was the first to call for anchor to be lifted, and the first to set off for the glory of the ultimate prize, the head of a Linnorm. After tracking the creature to the mysterious island of ancestors, White Estrid battled fiercely with the Linnorm Boiltongue. Yet in the final moments, instead of killing the monster, Estrid accepted the beast's plea to parley, and bound him to her service, agreeing to take Boiltongue alive as her thrall. Estrid returned to Halgrim to claim the title of Linnorm King as her own, where Boiltongue now stands behind her throne, a living trophy and avatar of her power. Queen Estrid also returned from the Isle with a powerful weapon, though she will not share anything about its origin, beyond that it was a gift from the earth spirits that inhabit the island, making the elders of Halgrim uneasy about who or what Estrid might be beholden to. Despite her detractors, White Estrid is currently one of the longest established Linnorm Kings. She rules with ferocity and continually engages in military moves as well as diplomatic ones. She encourages agrarian pursuits, and due to the presence of Boiltongue, her farmlands are often the most secure. Estrid also encourages groups outside of the Ulfin to settle in her lands. Her subjects include orcs, half-orcs, and dwarves. A nervous alliance between the western kingdoms of the Linnorm Kings has so far held, but the conquest of the southern islands combined with the recent defeat of King Opier Eightfingers by the Rune Lord Bellamarius, not to mention the emergence of new rulers in the Thanelands, Icemark, and in Southmoor, have added to a sense of tension in the land. Estrid considers the biggest threat to her kingdom to be Rune Lord Bellamarius. The Rune Lord's defeat of Oppir Eightfingers means that her hungry gaze can now turn to the Ironbound Islands. Estrid is wary of Bellamarius' ambition and has doubled the security around her person, as well as increased the number of longboat crews that venture into the steaming sea on patrol. Recognizing that the Rune Lord is attempting to goad Estrid into brash action, she has outmaneuvered these political traps, though she knows this may not remain effective for too long. The capital of her city is Hagreach, built into the steep coastal cliffs of the island of Battlewall. Hagreach is the second largest city in the lands of the Linnorm Kings, twice as large as Trollheim, though falling a distant second to Kalsgard. The city engulfs the inland edge of the best harbour on the island, and is cradled on the seaward side by the island's steep coastal heights and surrounded by fertile farmland. The two forks of the Rustflow River meet in the middle of the city, forming a deep waterway that sees heavy traffic. The city has stood for 1,000 years, but has grown sharply in the last decade, with whole neighbourhoods springing up at the edge of town to accommodate new arrivals eager to join the forward-thinking kingdom. Arable land is precious, however, and carpenters must often pack new houses and structures tightly in order to preserve what little farmland remains. Hagreach is home to 7 bridges spanning the Rustflow, and the ancient moat that separates Castle Island from the rest of the city. A persistent rumor says that anyone who walks a circuit through the city by crossing every bridge once, without crossing any of them twice, and without circumventing the river in any other way, will be made White Estrid's chief minister. Thus far no one has managed the feat, though it is common to see an ambitious second son walking purposefully between bridges, or a group of warriors in a mead hall poring over a city map. The other settlement on Battlewall is on the south side of the island, the town of Frembrud. Translates into either rocky outcropping or iron mount, depending on where the emphasis is placed in the word, and the town certainly features elements of both meanings. Frembrud perches high on the southern cliffs of the Battlewall, where a deep inlet allows fishing boats and whaling ships alike to offload their catches. A series of hoists, operated by thralls toiling at immense winches, allows goods and people to be swiftly transported up and down the cliff sides between the harbour below and the town above. Frembrud's immediate hinterlands feature numerous iron mines and a series of smithies that specialize in shipboard metal goods, so they've always had a busy port servicing all manner of Ulfin vessels. But close proximity to the new Thessalonian capital of Zinadesseril has turned the service town of Frembrud into a more militaristic town, ready to retaliate the Lord of Envy's maritime forces at a moment's notice. The other large inhabited island under Estrid's command is called Flintyreach, and it has a few notable settlements as well. Avaraka and Orkmut sport a few human and dwarven inhabitants, but these flinty-rich settlements were originally founded by a small group of forward-thinking half-orcs. It remains a sanctuary for their kind to this day. The half-orcs here have an almost religious attitude towards making a space in the world for half-orcs to live unmolested, and they are at the forefront of the effort to clear the Isle of Flintyreach for habitation and fight off the giants who still hold sway over several of the Isle's inland peaks. Half-orcs from across Avestan have made Flintyreach their home, particularly the large settlement of Avaraka, where the number of languages spoken and customs observed by its residents make it as cosmopolitan as many major cities. The racial solidarity of the Flintyreach half-orcs is seen at its most grand at Orkmut. The land surrounding this crescent-shaped cove has been stripped of trees, whose trunks were then carved to make a series of benches rising around a central platform on the rocky beach. Here, the island's half-orcs hold an annual congress to discuss the future of the race and policies they can use to advance themselves. Thunderhold. While most of the giants who dwell in the interior Flintyreach are solitary creatures, those who dwell in the fortress known as Thunderhold number over 100. These hill giants, Ettins, and trolls all look to their unusually charismatic leader, the hill giant Gorgonak, for advice and support in their lowland raids. Southmoor. Once known as Old Cyrusian, Southmoor was at one time ruled by the descendants of giants who survived the fall of Thassalon. The giants dwelled in this region for many generations, and were often the targets of glory-seeking raiders or would-be Ulfin warlords. Under Queen Ledamaro's rule in -450, however, the giants marched north and launched what is today called the Giantkin War. The war was originally conceived as a retaliation against Ulfin aggression, but Queen Ledamaro's brutality knew no bounds. She and her armies eventually laid siege to Kalsgard, and it was only at this point that the Linnorm kingdoms all decided it was time to fight back. Under the rule of King Ulvas, the Ulfin fought the giants back into Old Cyrusian, forcing Queen Ledamaro to fall back on a devastating Thessalonian weapon that destroyed her capital city of Torendev, along with both warring armies. By -440, the last major giant tribes had been driven from the region, forced to seek shelter in the Kodar Mountains or across the waters in the Ironbound Isles. For many more generations, these lands remained a backwater, claimed by dozens of bickering barbarian tribes. It wasn't until 1102 that King Eskir Honeytongue established the kingdom of Southmoor and claimed the ruins of Torrenday as his capital. He renamed the city Youghal, but the region's legacy of war and savagery remained to this very day. Despite its relatively large size, Southmoor is the least of the Linnorm kingdoms, lacking organization, population, reputation, and resources. The coastline is ragged with few natural harbors, and hundreds of miles of desolate moors and boglands that hold precious little in the way of natural resources, while the wilds are haunted by lawless barbarian tribes, trolls, giants, and worse. It doesn't get any better once one approaches the civilized center, where the capital city Youghal sits in the southern border of the Grungir Forest. The city of Youghal is the largest settlement in the kingdom, a ramshackle and disorganized mess of a town. The region's previous ruler, Oppir Eightfingers, successfully claimed the title of Linnorm King of Southmoor, but many questioned his right to rule, for the severed head he returned to the city was already quite decayed. While the suspicion is that Oppir might merely have chanced upon a dead Linnorm and scavenged its head to claim his title, he did summarily defeat all those who challenged his right to rule. In any case, the question of his rightful rulership is moot now, as Oppir was deposed, not by another Linnorm king, but in battle with the forces of the runelord Belimarius, who carved out her realm across northern Varissia and the southern Linnorm kingdoms. Oppir was succeeded by Ostog the Unslain, who slew the Linnorm Gullinjal to lay claim to the now empty throne of Youghal. He rules the kingdom of Southmoor today. Only ascended to leadership in the last year, Ostog has his work cut out for him, because by all accounts Oppir was a very poor governor, and his kingdom was in shambles, not to mention that Belimarius is eyeing the rest of the No-Lands for conquest, and Ostog's realm also shares a border with the dangerous Hag Queens of Irison to the north. He will need to shore up his defenses if he is to keep his rulership of his newly claimed kingdom. The capital of the region is the city of Youghal. Youghal is an extremely old city with strong walls and numerous solidly built structures within those walls, each constructed to withstand the rigors of combat. The city itself is built in a much older city, the ancient ruins of the Thessalonian city of Torrenday. While no remnant of that city remains above ground, deep vaults and strange dungeon holdings deep underground are constantly being discovered as new foundations are dug. In some cases, most famously with the abandoned Grand Arena, breaking into these ancient vaults releases strange monsters or magical afflictions that require the abandonment or destruction of buildings above ground. Aside from the main road, which bisects the city and passes right through the castle, the streets and alleys of Youghal are narrow and twisted, following little rhyme and less reason. Houses are packed tight together, and are usually 2 stories high, and the second story hang over the street. Youghall's density leads to sanitation problems, and the town is known for its distinctive smell. Still, as Youghal is the safest place in all of Southmoor, its population has swelled over the years, eventually spilling out of the walls in several places on the safer eastern side of town. Residents of Youghal tend to be suspicious, but ready to seize the opportunities presented by outsiders, be they possible business partners or easy marks. The insular community closes ranks in times of trouble, and a traveler who ends up on the wrong side of a local may soon find the whole town lining up against him. Other important locations in the region include the No-Lands. Until recently, Southmoor shared much of its southern border with Varissia, in a region known to both nations as the No-Lands, a desolate, rocky-strewn plain. The exact border between Varissia and the Linnorm kingdoms was vague here, for neither region really cared to fully claim the No-Lands under their purview. A land of broken hills, stony gullies, and scant vegetation, the No-Lands have long been regarded by the Linnorm kingdoms as a prime dumping ground for exiles and other Ulfin criminals. Those sent to the No-Lands are either killed or inducted into one of the area's tribes, violent gangs that function as nomadic raiding parties, killing travelers, animals, and other No-Landers to survive. Of course, that is all changing now, as runelord Belimarius is eyeing the No-Lands as her next area of conquest, and therefore will likely start making deals with the No-Land raiders to bring that land into her own growing kingdom. Copper Burgett. Where the northern reaches of the Kodar Mountains jut into the lands of the Linnorm Kings, deep and lucrative veins of copper, tin, and other valuable metals have attracted the attention of miners throughout the north for centuries. Over the years, the mine has changed hands from one Linnorm king to another countless times. Previously, Oppir Eightfingers of Youghal claimed the mines as his property, but today it rests firmly in the control of Thera Asheyes of Kalsgard, whose father wrested it from the younger Linnorm king's hand a decade ago. Under the able stewardship of Stengrim Ringforger and the Copper Berget dwarves, the mine produces tons of copper ingots that make their way into regular caravans from Copper Berget to the coffers of Kalsgard. No doubt a major contribution to Kalgard's continuing prominence and supremacy in the realm. Whether the new King Ostog will make reclaiming the mine for Southmoor, where it is more rightly located, a part of his agenda is yet to be seen. It may not, after all. He has many other pressing matters on his plate. In any case, a bustling mining and trading town clings to the edges of the Great Pit, full of brothels, gambling dens, and taverns catering to the rough miners and mountaineers that work the delves or pass through the town. A stout stone fortress squats above the mine's active shaft, its walls guarded around the clock by keen-eyed dwarf arbalesters and huskarls from Karlsgard, while two mighty stone golems stand tireless guard before its heavy iron gates. But all is not business as usual at Copper Burgett, for recent delves by the dwarves accidentally broke through into Narvoth, opening the mine into the Duergar tunnels. The Grey Dwarves seized the opportunity to claim Copper Burgett for themselves, invading the lower levels of the mine in force. So it seems, perhaps, that the mines are cursed to be fought over one way or the other regardless. Ysborg. In the southeastern reaches of the lands of the Linnorm Kings, where borders drawn on maps provide no real barrier to the eternal winter of the neighbouring Irisin, the troll fortress of Ysborg squats at the base of the Kodar Mountains. Ice trolls, ettins, ogres, and other giants come from all across the Linnorm kingdoms to gather beneath the banner of the Blue Jarl, a huge specimen of an ice troll with a giant battle-axe seemingly carved from magical ice mined from the mighty glaciers of the Kodars. Some say the Blue Jarl is a fugitive from the frost giant citadel of Holvergang in northern Irisin, but the Blue Jarl himself claims to be the son of the frost giant deity Thrymir. Although many doubt the veracity of this claim, few would disbelieve that the huge, powerfully muscled troll has at least some frost giant blood flowing in his veins. Ice troll marauders from Ysborg frequently raid neighbouring human settlements for slaves, or more often fresh food, for ice trolls relish the taste of human flesh. Several nearby villages have appealed to Trollheim for aid, but with the Black Ravens occupied with policing the border with Irisin, those unfortunate people must usually fend for themselves or flee their homes when Ysborg's bear riders are sighted on the northern horizon.